I've already lost everything worth losing. So whatever's waiting out there in the ice, it better be ready, because I've got nothing left to fear.
The laughter of his own flesh and blood echoed through the sterile, air-conditioned living room, a sharp and jagged contrast to the heavy silence William Wynne had lived in for months, to his cousins and siblings. He was nothing more than a relic, a 50-year-old broken soldier whose once broad shoulders were now burdened by the invisible weight of 1,000 battlefield memories. His muscular frame, a fortress of strength that had survived the harshest combat zones, seemed to irritate them now. He was a constant, living reminder of a family debt they never intended to repay. For the past 3 months, William had been relegated to sleeping on a grease-stained garage floor, the creeping cold of the concrete seeping into his bones through a thin, moth-eaten mat. They treated him like a malfunctioning piece of machinery, a burden to be managed with eye rolls and hushed whispers until he finally faded away. But William was never truly alone. Smokey, his 30 kilograms powerful German shepherd and former K-9 operative, never left his side for even a second. With a thick black and tan coat that bristled against the garage's drafts, Smokey's aggressive yet fiercely loyal expression acted as a constant, silent shield. When the family lawyer finally handed over the deed to a worthless cedar cabin hidden deep in the Sawtooth Mountains, a property so remote and dilapidated that no one else wanted it, the family jeered openly. They thought they were dumping him in a mountain wasteland to die in obscurity. They didn't realize that William's deep moss-green eyes still held the tactical fire of a warrior, and Smokey was about to sniff out a secret buried beneath those floorboards that would turn their mockery into bitter, desperate ashes. The betrayal was complete, but the retaliation was only just beginning to take shape in the shadows of the garage. William packed the remnants of his life into a single, weathered military duffel bag, his movements deliberate and efficient. His salt and pepper buzz cut caught the harsh morning light as he tossed his gear into the back of a rusted truck that had seen far better decades. He didn't offer a single look back at the suburban house that had become his psychological prison. Beside him in the cab, Smokey sat with an athletic and fierce posture, his amber eyes scanning the perimeter with the intensity of a dog still on active duty. William's square-jawed face was set in a grim mask of determination. The sun-kissed, rugged texture of his skin shifted as he gritted his powerful jawline. He was a man who had sacrificed his youth for people who gave him nothing but a garage floor. But as he shifted the truck into gear, he felt the first spark of true purpose in years. He was heading for the high country, leaving the stench of betrayal behind in the rearview mirror. Before we follow William and Smokey into the heart of the unforgiving Sawtooth wilderness, if you believe that loyalty is a bond that can never be broken, and that every veteran deserves a place to call home, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful stories of resilience and incredible K9s that protect our heroes. As the city skyline faded into the distance, William made a silent, ironclad vow to the dogs sitting beside him. They would build a fortress where no vulture could ever reach them, and they would do it on their own terms, no matter what the mountains threw their way. The narrow mountain road twisted like a dying snake as they climbed higher into the Sawtooth Range, leaving civilization far below the clouds. The air grew thin and sharp, smelling of ancient pine resin and the looming promise of an early winter frost. William drove with a steady, practiced hand, his deep crow's feet twitching occasionally as he watched the jagged, snow-capped peaks pierce the heavy gray sky like the teeth of a predator. Smokey's ears remained perfectly upright, his K-9 instincts vibrating as he sensed a shift from urban decay to raw, natural power. After hours of navigating treacherous gravel switchbacks, the cabin finally appeared, a rugged, lonely structure of thick cedar logs, darkened and silvered by half a century of mountain storms. It looked almost abandoned, its small windows like empty eye sockets staring out at the vast, encroaching forest. To any developer, it was a shack to be bulldozed. To William, it was a strategic base of operations. He stepped out of the truck, his tall frame dwarfing the small porch, and took his first real breath of freedom. There were no judgmental whispers here, no cold garage floors, and no fake smiles. There was only the wind howling through the timber, the scent of wild earth, and the 30 kilograms of muscle and loyalty that jumped down from the truck to stand at his side. The cabin was silent, waiting for its master to return and awaken the secrets hidden within its wooden bones. William ran a hand over the rough logs, feeling a strange connection to the weathered wood. They were both scarred, both forgotten, and both still standing. Stepping inside the cabin felt like entering a forgotten time capsule. The interior was heavy with the smell of wood smoke, old leather, and the damp, earthy musk of the high mountains. Dust motes danced in the pale shafts of light that pierced through the grime-covered windows, settling on a few pieces of primitive, hand-carved furniture. William dropped his duffel bag with a heavy thud that echoed through the small space, but Smokey did not relax. The dog immediately began a tactical sweep of the room, moving with the silent precision of his military training. He sniffed every corner, checked the space behind the massive stone fireplace that dominated the room, and paused briefly at the back door, ensuring the perimeter was secure. William sat heavily on an old wooden chair, the cedar groaning under his muscular weight. He rubbed the deep forehead wrinkles that served as a map of a life spent in global conflict for the first time in nearly a decade. The noise in his head, the phantom echoes of commanding officers and the sharp stings of family betrayal, began to quiet down. Smokey finished his sweep and returned to William's side, resting his large, powerful head on William's knee. The dog's fierce expression softened just enough to show he felt the shift in the atmosphere. They were the only two souls for miles, a man and his dog against the world. William looked at his hands, steady for the first time in months, and realized that the mountains weren't just a place to hide. They were a place to heal. But before he could find peace, he would first have to face what lay beneath the surface. Night fell over the Sawtooth Mountains like a heavy velvet shroud, bringing with it a cold that could crack stone. Inside the cabin, a small fire crackled on the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows against the log walls. William watched the orange flames, his moss-green eyes reflecting the flickering light. Despite the newfound serenity, the deep darkness of the woods brought back the old ghosts. In the shifting light, the cedar walls seemed to morph into crumbling ruins of a desert village. The wind howling through the pines sounded too much like the distant, rhythmic beat of rotor blades. William's breathing grew shallow and ragged, his powerful hands beginning to tremble as the trauma of his service clawed at his chest. threatening to drag him back into the sand and smoke. But Smokey was there, ever the vigilant operative. The German shepherd sensed a spike in William's heart rate before the man even fully realized he was spiraling into a nightmare. Smokey stood up and nudged William's hand firmly with his nose, a grounding technique they had perfected during the dog's rehabilitation years ago. The dog's solid, warm presence and his steady, rhythmic breathing acted as a living anchor. William inhaled the scent of the dog and the burning cedar, slowly pulling himself back to the Idaho mountain air. He wasn't in a war zone anymore. He was in his own fortress. He reached down, scratching Smokey behind the ears, feeling the dog's athletic frame relax slightly. "Good boy, Smokey," he whispered, his voice like gravel. They stayed like that for a long time, two veterans guarding each other in the dark, unaware that the real challenge wouldn't come from the past, but from the very floor they were sitting on. The following morning, a crisp, silver frost had turned the forest, clearing into a field of jagged diamonds. William was outside early, his broad shoulders straining against the fabric of his tactical shirt as he split heavy cedar logs for the winter. Each powerful swing of the axe was a calculated release of the frustration he had carried from the city. However, inside the cabin, Smokey was acting strangely. Instead of his usual disciplined nap by the hearth, the German shepherd was pacing with a restless, focused energy. He was ignoring his water bowl and his favorite ball, focused entirely on a specific area of the floorboards where the massive stone fireplace met the cedar planks. Smokey began to sniff with an aggressive intensity, his tail held low and stiff, his ears twitching at a frequency only he could hear. He let out a low, guttural huff, a specific alert sound he usually reserved for discovering hidden explosives or contraband in the field. William stopped his work, leaning the axe against the porch railing, and stepped inside, wiping sweat from his sun-kissed brow. "What is it, Smokey? You found a squirrel under there?" he asked, his voice echoing in the quiet room. But Smokey didn't wag his tail or look up. Instead, he began to scratch at the wood with a frantic, primitive intensity, his powerful claws raking across the ancient cedar. William knelt beside him, his moss-green eyes narrowing as he realized his partner wasn't playing. He was working a lead. Smokey's claws left deep, pale grooves in the dark wood. William reached out, his massive, scarred hands gently but firmly gripping the dog's harness. "Easy, boy. Show me." As William leaned closer to the floor, he smelled something that didn't belong in a rustic mountain cabin, a faint, metallic scent of cold iron and aged machinery oil. It was a scent he knew from maintaining armored vehicles in the motor pool. He noticed that one particular plank was slightly raised, its edges worn differently than the others, as if it had been moved many times decades ago. With a grunt of effort, William shoved a heavy, dust-caked rug aside, exposing the raw floorboards. Smokey intensified his digging, his powerful muscles rippling under his black and tan coat. William grabbed a heavy-duty flathead screwdriver from his tactical kit and wedged the tip into the narrow gap between the planks. As he applied pressure with his broad shoulders, the old wood groaned and splintered, a sharp sound that cracked through the silent cabin like a gunshot. Beneath the cedar plank was not the dirt foundation he expected, but a solid, cold slab of iron-reinforced steel. William stared, his deep forehead wrinkles furrowing. This wasn't structural repair. It was a deliberate, heavy-duty concealment. William sat back on his haunches, his heart hammering a rhythmic beat against his ribs. He cleared away the accumulated grime and splinters of 50 years to reveal a heavy, circular vault door built directly into the mountain stone beneath the cabin. It was a masterpiece of old-world security, featuring a massive mechanical combination dial and a lever that looked like it had been stripped from a naval vessel. William ran his fingers over the cold metal, feeling the vibration of a secret that had been waiting for the right person to find it. His grandfather had always been a man of mysterious absences and sudden, quiet wealth, but William had always assumed it was just mountain folklore. Now, looking at this industrial-grade vault, he realized the worthless cabin was merely a lid on something much larger. Smokey sat down beside the opening, his fierce posture returning as he took up a defensive position over the discovery. He looked at William with quiet intelligence, as if waiting for the next command. William reached for the dial, his powerful jawline set in a hard line. He didn't know the code, but he knew his grandfather's military service number by heart. It was a long shot, but in the wilderness, sometimes the oldest ghosts are the ones who guide you home. Just as William began to test the combination, a distant, high-pitched roar broke the mountain peace. It was the sound of a modern, high-horsepower engine struggling against a gravel incline. Smokey was on his feet in a heartbeat, a low, dangerous growl vibrating deep in his 30 kilograms frame. William stood up, his tall frame filling the doorway as he watched a sleek, black luxury SUV pull into the clearing, its tires kicking up plumes of frozen dust. It was Greg, his cousin, and a local real estate scout William didn't recognize. They stepped out of the vehicle, looking like polished aliens in their designer wool coats against the rugged, primal backdrop of the Sawtooths. Greg looked at the cabin with an air of smug superiority. Missing the tactical cameras William had already hidden in the trees. Still living like a stray dog, I see William, Greg called out, his voice dripping with fake concern. William didn't move. His face remained a rugged, unreadable mask, his moss-green eyes tracking every movement. He knew exactly why they were here. They hadn't come to check on his health. They had come to see if he was ready to surrender the land for the resort project. They had no idea they were standing only a few feet away from a secret that would make their resort look like a lemonade stand. Greg stepped toward the porch, but he didn't make it to the first step. Smokey moved to the front of the landing, his athletic and fierce posture making it clear that any further progress would be met with tactical force. The dog's aggressive expression and bared teeth made the real estate scout stumble back in genuine fear, nearly tripping over a tree root. "Keep that beast under control. We're just here to offer you a generous way out of this death trap," Greg shouted, his bravado cracking under Smokey's intense gaze. William crossed his powerful arms over his chest, his moss-green eyes cold as the mountain ice. "This cabin is mine by blood and deed, and Smokey doesn't like the smell of people who break promises." Greg sneered, but he made sure to stay well away from the dog's reach. "You're a broken man, William, living up here alone with a weapon on a leash. The court will find you incompetent within a month. The battle lines have been drawn, and Greg has no idea what William is guarding beneath his feet. Will William open the vault before the lawyers arrive, or will Greg find a way to seize the cabin? Subscribe now and hit the like button to support William and Smokey as they defend their mountain sanctuary. William watched the SUV disappear down the trail, but the silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm. He had to open that iron door, and he had to do it before the vultures returned with reinforcements. With the sound of Greg's SUV fading into the distance, William returned to the iron door, his pulse steady but fast. He knelt on the cold stone, his broad shoulders blocking the dim light from a window. He began to input the numbers of his grandfather's military service ID, rotating the mechanical dial with the precision of a man defusing a bomb. The cabin was silent, save for the rhythmic clicking of the tumblers and the steady breathing of Smokey, who stood over him like a living gargoyle. The first sequence failed. The second, a combination of his grandfather's birth year and retirement date, also met with a hollow silence. William took a deep breath, rubbing the deep forehead wrinkles that spoke of his own years of service. He looked at the dog. One more shot, boy. He tried the date of his own return from his last tour, the day his grandfather had last seen him. As the final digit clicked into place, a heavy, metallic thud vibrated through the floorboards. The internal bolts, greased decades ago and still functional, retracted with a slow, agonizing groan. William gripped the iron lever, his powerful jawline tightening as he applied his full muscular strength. The door didn't just open. It exhaled a cold, dry breath of air that smelled of ancient paper, oil, and something heavy, something that had been waiting in the dark for 40 years. The iron door swung upward on counterweight hinges, revealing a narrow stone staircase that descended into the darkness beneath the cabin. William lit his high-intensity military lantern, the beam cutting through the shadows like a blade. Smokey didn't wait for a command. He moved to the edge of the opening, his black and tan coat illuminated by the artificial light. He gave a sharp, inquisitive bark, the sound echoing deep into the earth. William descended first, his heavy boots ringing against the cold stone steps. As the light from the lantern swept across the underground chamber, William froze. The room was roughly the size of the cabin above, lined with shelves of reinforced cedar. This wasn't a bunker. It was a sanctuary of wealth. Neatly stacked wooden crates, each marked with stenciled military codes, filled the space. William approached the nearest crate, his moss-green eyes wide with disbelief. He pried the lid open with his combat knife, that was splintering easily. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were rows of gold bullion, unrefined, heavy, and glowing with a dull, hypnotic light. He moved to the next shelf and found stacks of old government bonds and sealed canisters of currency. His grandfather hadn't left him a shack. He had left him a fortune that could buy the very mountain they were standing on. William sat on an empty crate, the weight of the discovery pressing down on his broad shoulders. He felt a sudden, sharp sting in his eyes, the deep crow's feet twitching as the reality of his situation shifted. For months, he had been treated as a man with no value, a broken relic to be discarded. Now, he was holding the keys to an empire. Smokey wandered to the vault, his powerful nose working overtime as he inspected the corners, his fierce posture never wavering. The dog sensed the gravity of the room. Sitting beside a chest filled with antique watches and rare jewelry, William reached out, his rugged, sun-kissed hand trembling as he touched a gold bar. He realized then that his grandfather had known this day would come, the day the family would turn on William. This wasn't just money. It was a weapon for his survival. But as a soldier, William knew that a treasure this large was a beacon for trouble. If Greg or anyone in the town suspected what was beneath these floorboards, the worthless cabin would become a battlefield. He looked at Smokey, whose amber eyes reflected the lantern's glow. "We can't let them know, boy," William whispered. "Not until we're ready." William emerged from the vault, carefully replacing the iron door and floorboards. He spent the rest of the afternoon meticulously smoothing the dust over the planks to ensure no one would notice they had been moved. However, his K-9 operative was still on high alert. Smokey stood by the north window, his black and tan coat bristling, a low, guttural vibration in his chest that signaled an external threat. William moved the window, staying in the shadows to avoid being seen from the outside. He pulled out his tactical binoculars, scanning the dense tree-line of the Sawtooth forest. About 200 yards away, partially obscured by the thick pines, he saw a flash of light, the reflection of a lens. Someone was out there, watching the cabin with a long-range camera. It wasn't Greg. Greg didn't have the patience for a stakeout. It was a professional. William's powerful jawline set in a hard mask. The vultures were already circling, and they were using more than just legal threats. He realized that the break-in Greg had threatened wasn't a future possibility. It was an active operation. He turned to Smokey, his moss-green eyes cold. "Perimeter sweep, boy. Stealth mode." William didn't panic. He moved with the calculated efficiency of a K-9 operative commander. He spent the next few hours reinforcing the cabin from the inside, using hidden steel brackets to secure the doors and windows. He pulled out a box of tactical gear he had kept from his service days, night vision trail cameras, silent tripwire alarms, and high-intensity motion lights. He worked with a fierce energy, his muscular frame moving with a purpose he hadn't felt since he was in the desert. Smokey was his shadow, patrolling the kill zones they had mapped out around the clearing. The dog's athletic posture was a warning to anyone watching from the woods. William didn't set traps to kill, but he set them to disorient and identify. By the time the sun began to dip behind the jagged Sawtooth peaks, the cabin was no longer just a shack. It was a fortified observation post. William sat in the dark, his salt and pepper hair silvered by the moonlight, a cold cup of coffee in his hand. He wasn't the prey anymore. He was the hunter, and he was waiting for first-person brave or stupid, enough to step onto his land. 3 days after the discovery of the vault, the silence of the Sawtooth was broken not by a hunter's rifle, but by the official chime of a high-end siren. William stood on the porch, his muscular frame silhouetted against the dark cedar logs as Greg returned. This time, Greg wasn't alone. He was accompanied by a man in a sharp, slate-gray suit who carried a leather briefcase like a shield. "William Wynn," the man announced, his voice echoing with practiced authority. "I am David Mercer, representing your siblings and the county's social services. We have a court-ordered petition for a legal guardianship review." William's powerful jawline tightened. The vultures had shifted from harassment to legal warfare. They were claiming that his PTSD and his erratic behavior of moving to a remote cabin made him a danger to himself and incapable of managing his inherited estate. Mercer looked at the cabin with visible disdain, then at Smokey, who stood like a stone statue at William's side. The dog's aggressive expression was enough to keep Mercer at a 10-foot distance. William didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the tactical folder he had prepared. "I've spent 20 years defending the laws you're trying to twist," William said, his moss-green eyes as cold as the mountain springs. "You want to talk capacity? Let's talk about it in front of a judge who doesn't take lunch meetings with Greg." Mercer tried to step forward, intent on placing a notice of entry on the cabin door. But he didn't make it 2 feet. Smokey's athletic and fierce posture shifted. The dog didn't bark. He let out a low, vibrating hum, a sound that resonated in the chest of anyone standing too close. It was the sound of a K-9 operative marking a target. Mercer froze, his face turning a sickly shade of pale. "That animal is a liability, Greg," Mercer whispered, his eyes locked on Smokey's bared teeth. William placed a calm hand on Smokey's head, feeling the dog's powerful muscles rippling with restrained energy. "Smokey is a decorated veteran. Just like me, he knows a threat when he smells one. And right now the air is thick with it." Greg sneered from the safety of the SUV, shouting that they would return with the sheriff to seize the property. But William saw through bravado. They weren't worried about his health. They were terrified that he had found what they had missed for years. As they drove away, William turned to Smokey. He knew the legal battle was just a smoke screen for something more physical. The man with the camera in the woods was still there, and tonight he wouldn't be just taking pictures. That night, beneath the warm glow of an oil lamp, William opened a hidden compartment in the vault's floor. Inside, he found a small leather-bound journal, The Real Inheritance. As he flipped through the weathered pages, his moss-green eyes widened. His grandfather hadn't just been a hermit. He had been a contractor during the 1970s, moving assets for people who didn't exist in official records. The gold wasn't just money. It was unclaimed compensation for a life spent in the shadows. One passage, written in a shaky but firm hand, stood out. "William, the family will come for the wood, but they will burn the house to find the gold. Trust the dog more than the blood. He sees the heart. They only see the price." William leaned back, his deep forehead wrinkles furrowing as he looked at Smokey. The dog was staring at the back door, his ears twitching at the sound of distant twigs snapping. William realized the journal was a warning. The people his grandfather worked for might still be out there, or worse, Greg had hired people who knew exactly what they were looking for. The stakes had just moved from a family feud to a high-stakes tactical defense. William knew he couldn't stay in a defensive posture forever. A soldier who only waits to be hit eventually loses. He sat at the small wooden table, his salt and pepper hair catching the dim light, and began to map out a counteroffensive. He wouldn't use violence. There had been enough of that in his life. But he would use the one thing the greedy feared most: exposure. He began to organize the gold and the bonds, documenting every piece and preparing to move them to a secure, third-party military-grade facility. He reached out to an old contact from his K-9 unit, a man who now ran a private security firm specializing in veteran protection. William realized he could use this worthless cabin to start something bigger, a sanctuary for men like him, funded by the very gold his family tried to steal. But he had to survive the night first. Smokey stood and walked the kitchen, his black and tan coat blending into the shadows. He gave a single, sharp huff. The silent tripwires he had installed had just been tripped. The watchers were no longer watching. They were moving in. William turned off the lantern, plunging the cabin into a tactical darkness that only he and Smokey understood. He moved with muscular grace, his square-jawed face a mask of calm intensity. Outside, two figures moved through the pines, wearing dark, tactical gear that didn't belong in a small Idaho town. They thought they were approaching a sleeping old man. They didn't know they were entering a kill box designed by a master of canine operations. William checked his monitor. The trail cameras showed the intruders carried thermal scanners. "Smokey, flank left," William whispered. The German shepherd vanished through the dog door as silently as a ghost. William stood by the fireplace, the cold iron of the vault lever beneath his hand. He wasn't afraid. For the first time since the war, he felt complete. He was protecting his home, his dog, and his future. The vultures are in the nest, but they have no idea that the prey has teeth. Will William and Smokey be able to repel the intruders without shedding blood? Or will the secret of the vault be lost forever? Subscribe and like this video to see the high-stakes showdown in the Sawtooth Mountains. Suddenly, the back window shattered, and the first flashbang grenade rolled across the cedar floor. The battle for the Sawtooth legacy had officially begun. The flashbang detonated with a deafening crack, filling the cabin with a blinding white light and a high-pitched ring that would have paralyzed any ordinary man. But William Wynn was no ordinary man. Having survived hundreds of breaches in his military career, he had already closed his eyes and opened his mouth to equalize the pressure. In the tactical silence that followed, the two intruders in dark gear vaulted through the shattered window, their boots thudding heavily on the cedar floor. They moved with professional confidence, thinking the old veteran was disoriented on the floor. They were wrong. William was standing in the shadows of the stone fireplace, his muscular frame as immovable as the mountain itself. "You've made a serious tactical error," William's voice boomed through the smoke, calm and terrifying. The first intruder swung his heavy flashlight toward the sound, but before the beam could land, a 30-kilogram shadow erupted from the darkness. Smokey didn't bark. He was a silent streak of black and tan power. The dog slammed into the intruder's chest with the force of a battering ram, the man's breath escaping in a pained wheeze as he hit the wall. Smokey's aggressive expression, illuminated by the flickering embers of the fire, was the last thing the man saw before his world turned into a struggle for survival. The second intruder panicked, reaching for a stun gun on his belt. But William moved with a speed that defied his 50 years. He didn't use a weapon. He used the environment he had meticulously prepared, with a sharp tug on a hidden cable near the hearth. A heavy wooden shelving unit, bolted with a quick-release mechanism, swung forward, pinning the second man against the kitchen counter. The man struggled, but the sheer weight of the cedar and the tactical angle left him trapped. Outside, the motion sensor floodlights William had installed suddenly roared to life, bathing the clearing in a harsh 5,000 lumen glare. The sudden illumination revealed a third man waiting near the truck, Greg, looking terrified and out of his depth. William stepped onto the porch, his tall frame filling the space. His salt and pepper hair glowing in the artificial light. Smokey stood over the first intruder inside, one powerful paw on the man's chest. His moss-green eyes fixed on William, awaiting the next command. "I told you to stay away from my mountain, Greg," William called out, his powerful jawline set like granite. "Now, you're not just a bad cousin. You're a felon caught in the act." The clearing was silent except for the heavy breathing of the trapped men and the low, dangerous vibration in Smokey's throat. Greg began to stammer, his expensive coat stained with mud and sweat. We wanted to see if you were okay. These guys are just security." William walked down the porch steps, his heavy boots crunching on the frozen dirt. He held up a small, high-definition digital recorder. "I have your security on video breaking a window and throwing a tactical grenade in the state of Idaho. That's aggravated burglary and attempted assault." William looked at the two men inside, then back at Greg. The deep crow's feet around his eyes didn't show anger. They showed profound, weary disappointment. He had fought for a country that included people like this, people who would treat their own blood like trash for a chance at a hidden vault. "You didn't come for me," William said quietly. "You came for what's under the floor. But you forgot one thing. I'm not the one guarding it. We are." Smokey let out a sharp, echoing bark, a sound of victory that rang through the Sawtooth peaks. By the time the county sheriff arrived, alerted by the silent alarm system William had linked to the local station, the two intruders were zip-tied and Greg was sitting on the ground, weeping with a mix of fear and shame. The sheriff, a man who had known William's grandfather, looked at the shattered window and the tactical gear. "Looks like you had a busy night, William." William nodded, his moss-green eyes never leaving his dog. "Just a standard perimeter breach, Sheriff." In the days that followed, the story of the battle at the cabin spread to the town of Clearwater like wildfire. The legal guardianship petition Greg had filed was not just denied, it was laughed out of court, with the video evidence and the testimony of the captured hired thugs. "William dinto zuts potet his home, ông đã xóa sạch mọi nghi ngờ về năng lực của mình." The family that had treated him like a burden was now facing a mountain of legal fees and criminal charges. William stood in his cabin, the floorboards repaired, the vault secret still safe from the public, but the weight on his broad shoulders had finally lifted. With the threat of his family gone, William didn't go to a tropical island or buy a mansion. He returned to the vault one last time, looking at the gold and the bonds his grandfather had left behind. He realized the true purpose of this inheritance. He reached out to his old K-9 unit contacts and veteran support groups. He wasn't going to hide the wealth. He was going to use it to build Smokey's Haven, a sanctuary where veterans could come to heal, work with service dogs, and find the dignity that the civilian world had tried to strip from them. He looked at Smokey, who was resting by the newly repaired fireplace, his black and tan coat shining in the firelight. The dog had found the vault, but in doing so, he had found their mission. William began to draft the plans for the first 3 guest cabins, his muscular hands steady as he drew. The Sawtooth Mountains were no longer a place of exile. They were a place of rebirth. William has turned the betrayal into a legacy, but the work is just beginning. How will the town react to a group of warriors moving into the mountains? Subscribe and like to see the final chapters of this incredible journey and the growth of Smokey's Haven. William stepped onto the porch and looked at the horizon, knowing that for the first time in 50 years, he wasn't just surviving, he was leading. The Sawtooth Mountains began to transform as spring arrived, but it wasn't the sound of luxury developers that filled the valley. It was a rhythmic sound of veteran craftsmanship. William used a portion of the gold to hire out-of-work combat engineers, men who understood the value of a solid foundation and a quiet life. Together, they began building the infrastructure for Smokey's Haven. William was a constant presence on the site, his tall, muscular frame moving between the rising cedar structures with a renewed vitality. He wasn't just a landlord, he was a brother-in-arms. He didn't just build cabins, he built a world-class K-9 training facility. He realized that many veterans needed what Smokey had given him, a reason to stay grounded, and a partner who never judged the scars of the past. Smokey himself became the alpha of the new pack, his aggressive expression reserved for intruders, while showing a strange, intuitive gentleness toward the men who arrived with shaking hands and haunted eyes. William watched as a former sergeant, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words a year, knelt down to let Smokey lean against him. In that moment, William knew the gold was finally being spent on something that truly glittered. Just as the first 3 veterans were moving into their new homes, a final shadow of the past appeared. Martha, the aunt who had spearheaded the plan to put William in a facility, drove up the mountain road. She didn't come with lawyers this time. She came with a look of desperate defeat. Her own finances had collapsed after Greg's legal scandals, and the family was facing ruin. She stood on the porch of the now magnificent cabin, looking at the man she had once left asleep on a garage floor. William stood before her, his broad shoulders squared, his salt and pepper beard neatly groomed, looking every bit like the commander of the mountain. "We're family, William," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "You have all this. Surely you can spare something for your own blood." William looked at her, his moss-green eyes devoid of malice, but filled with a hard, unwavering truth. He reached down and rested his hand on Smokey's powerful head. "Family is a word you use as a cage, Martha," William said quietly. "Loyalty is the only thing that earns a place at this table. You left me in the cold when I had nothing. Now, I'm using what I have to make sure no other soldier ever feels that cold again." He didn't turn her away empty-handed. He gave her enough to survive, but he made it clear. The gates of the haven were closed to those who valued price over person. Years passed, and Smokey's Haven became a beacon of hope across the country. The worthless cabin had expanded into a thriving community, where the bond between man and dog was sacred. William Wynn became a legend, not for the gold he found, but for the lives he rebuilt. He remained the same rugged, square-jawed man, though the deep crow's feet around his eyes were now formed by the sun and the laughter of the men he had saved. He never moved out of the original cabin. He kept the fireplace and the empty vault as a reminder of where it all began. Smokey was no longer the fierce K-9 operative of the desert, but the venerable guardian of the valley. Every new dog that entered the program was vetted by Smokey, who would sit with quiet, powerful dignity as the younger pups learned to walk the perimeter. The black and tan of his coat had faded with gray around the muzzle, but his amber eyes remained as sharp as the day he found the floorboards. William and Smokey had proven that betrayal doesn't define a man. It's how he guards the truth after the battle is over that matters. On a quiet evening, with the sun dipping behind the jagged Sawtooth peaks and painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold, William sat on his porch. He held the old journal of his grandfather, adding his own final entry. He wrote about the garage floor, the cold concrete, and the laughter of the greedy. But mostly, he wrote about the dog who saw a vault where others saw dust. He realized that the gold in the ground was just metal. The real wealth was a community of brothers who now patrol these woods, each with a loyal German shepherd at his side. He looked down at Smokey, who was resting his heavy head on William's boots. The dog's breathing was slow and steady, a rhythmic reminder of a decade of peace. William realized that his family hadn't just given him a cabin. They had given him a chance to show the world what a veteran and his dog could do when left to their own devices. They were no longer the broken relics the world had discarded. They were the sentinels of the Sawtooth, the masters of their own destiny. The video fades into a wide shot of the valley, the lights of the veteran cabins glowing like stars in the mountain twilight. William stands up, his tall frame still powerful, and whistles softly. Smokey is on his feet instantly, his athletic posture a bit slower but no less fierce. Together, they begin their final patrol of the evening, walking the tree-line as the moon rises. William's voice carries on the wind as he addresses the viewers one last time. Wealth can be stolen, and blood can betray. But a heart like Smokey's is a fortress that no enemy can breach. If the story of betrayal, gold, and the ultimate loyalty touched your heart, please leave a 1 in the comments to honor our veterans and their K9 partners. Your support has kept this story alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who believes that every dog truly has his day. From the heart of the Sawtooth Mountains, thank you for watching. William and Smokey's watch continues, and we'll see you in the next story of courage. The camera pans up to the jagged peaks, where a single wolf howls in the distance, answered by the sharp, confident bark of a German shepherd who found
The channel
more
The Dog
than
and
just
the
a
Veteran
vault.
is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.